Daniel Cross was 41 years old, the kind of man who answered his phone on the second ring every time, no matter who was calling. He kept 2 pairs of boots by the back door, one for the warehouse floor, one for everywhere else, and replaced them the same week each January, whether they needed it or not. He had spent 20 years inside the logistics industry without once raising his voice in a meeting, and the people who worked for him said that was exactly why they trusted him. On the last Tuesday in September, at 9:41 in the evening, his wife came into the kitchen still wearing the navy dress she'd put on that morning for what she'd called a team dinner. She set her purse on the counter. She didn't sit down. "You're worthless, Daniel," Vanessa said. "You always have been. I just didn't want to admit it to myself until tonight." She said it evenly, the way a person says something they've rehearsed enough times that it no longer costs them anything to say out loud. Daniel didn't answer right away. Everything Vanessa believed in that moment, about what he had built, about what he didn't yet have, about who actually held the leverage in the room, was about to turn out to be exactly backward. Before we go any further, drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The kitchen had gone quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when one person has finished talking and the other hasn't decided yet whether he's going to. Daniel had spent 19 years working his way from a warehouse floor in Toledo to an operations director's office at Halstead Freight and Logistics, the kind of climb that doesn't photograph well but holds up under any kind of weight you put on it. He drove a 2014 GMC Sierra with 161,000 miles on it, and a dent in the tailgate he'd never bothered to fix. He wore the same steel watch his father had given him the day he made foreman, the band replaced twice, the face never. Every morning at 5:30, he made 1 cup of coffee in a percolator older than his marriage and drank it standing at the kitchen window before anyone else in the house was awake. He was the kind of man who read a contract twice before signing it, and never needed a third read. Because he hadn't missed anything the first 2 times. 12 years earlier, when Vanessa was finishing her MBA and the loan payments came due before her first paycheck did, Daniel had picked up a second job running weekend dispatch shifts at a competing freight yard. 11 months, every Saturday and Sunday, 6 in the morning until 4, and never once told her how tired he actually was, because she had enough to carry already. She'd thanked him once, in passing, the week she got her diploma, and never mentioned it again. He had no idea that the man currently texting his wife from somewhere outside Cincinnati was about to become an employee of his. Then came the Tuesday in September. Everything that followed traced back to that kitchen. The overhead light had been left on too bright, the kind of bright that makes everyone in a room look slightly more exposed than they want to be. Vanessa had timed her arrival for after dinner, when the dishes were already done and there'd be nothing for her hands to do but talk. She'd come in wearing perfume Daniel didn't recognize, carrying a leather folio he definitely didn't recognize. The kind people carry into meetings they want to be remembered for. "I've given this a lot of thought," she said. "I'm being honest with you for the first time in longer than I want to admit." Daniel set his coffee mug in the sink. He didn't say anything yet. "David sees what I'm capable of," she said. "He talks about where the company's headed. Where he's headed. You talk about routes and load times." She let that sit there a moment. "I deserve someone who's actually going somewhere, Daniel. I think you already know that." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're worthless," she said again, quieter this time, as if she needed to hear herself land it twice to fully believe it. "You always have been." Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask who David was, because he already knew. He didn't ask how long, because the answer wasn't going to change what he was about to do next. He stood very still, and let the silence take up the space where his reaction would have gone. What he did notice, the way he noticed a measurement that was 1/16 of an inch off, was the name printed across the corner of the folio she'd set on the counter. Sterling Freight Solutions, Western Region Leadership Summit. He'd read an acquisition file with that exact letterhead 4 days earlier, sitting at his own desk, signing the last page of it. He said nothing about it. He filed it away the way he filed anything that didn't add up yet, without conclusion. Not yet. "I'm not asking you to understand it," Vanessa said. "I'm telling you because I owe myself that much honesty. You were never going to be more than what you are right now. I need someone who's still becoming something." Daniel picked his keys up off the counter. He folded the dish towel he'd left hanging over the faucet, out of habit, not composure, though it would look like the second thing to anyone watching. "I'll be at the shop," he said. He walked out to the truck. He needed the cold air and 20 minutes on a dark road more than he needed to say anything else that night. The rest could wait. It usually could. 2 years before that Tuesday, Daniel had started doing something he never mentioned to Vanessa. Mostly because there hadn't seemed to be anything worth mentioning yet. He'd been setting aside a portion of every dispatch bonus and every overtime check into a brokerage account under his own name. Not hiding it exactly. Just not bringing it up, the same way he didn't bring up most things until they were finished. Over 4 years, it had grown into something real. 18 months ago, a retired engineer named Walter Bishop, who'd mentored him since his first warehouse job, introduced him to a small group raising capital to acquire a struggling mid-size freight carrier out of Columbus. Daniel read the company's financials the way he read a set of construction plans, not focusing on any single line first, but scanning the whole structure until the weak points showed themselves. The company was carrying bad debt and worse leadership, but its roots were solid, and its drivers were good. He recognized a foundation that was sound underneath a structure that had been poorly maintained. He put in everything he had. Then he waited, the way he'd always waited, while the deal assembled itself 1 quarter at a time. He'd noticed things shifting at home before that. Vanessa's phone face down more often than it used to be. A new gym membership, 2 towns over. Dinners that ran later than the traffic explained. He told himself it was the promotion stress, the long hours her new title demanded. He extended the kind of patience he'd give a job that wasn't ready for inspection yet. Not because he was naive, but because he believed in what they'd built enough to assume it could survive a rough season. Walter Bishop had told him once, years before any of this, that Daniel had a gift most people never developed. He could look at something falling apart and see exactly where to put the first support beam. Daniel hadn't thought much of the compliment at the time. He filed it the way he filed everything. That was the part Vanessa had never bothered to ask about. By the time she walked into the kitchen that Tuesday, the acquisition had already closed. She'd find out everything else about it later, in a room she didn't choose. Daniel didn't sleep at the shop that night. He drove to Eleanor Voss's house instead, the way he had a handful of times over the past 9 years whenever something needed sorting that he couldn't sort standing up. Eleanor was 64. Small and composed, with silver hair she kept cut short for practicality rather than style. She'd spent 31 years as a paralegal before retiring, and for the last decade she'd kept Daniel's books, his contracts, and, more than either of them ever said out loud, a careful eye on the parts of his life he was too busy building to watch himself. She opened the door before he knocked, already in her robe, already making coffee. "Sit down," she said. "Eat something first. Then we'll talk." He sat. "I'm going to lay this out in order," Eleanor said. Once he had a plate in front of him he wasn't going to touch. "I need you to let me get through all of it before you say anything back." She opened a folder she'd clearly had ready for longer than he wanted to think about. The first page was dated 14 months earlier, a credit card statement showing a hotel charge in a town 40 minutes from their house, a town neither of them had any reason to be in. The second page showed the same charge, repeated. The pattern ran 9 times across that span, always on a Thursday, always the same hotel. Daniel looked at the dates. He recognized the rhythm. Thursdays were when Vanessa's regional check-ins always ran late. He said nothing. "There's more," Eleanor said. She slid the next document across the table, a transfer record from the joint brokerage account he and Vanessa had opened together 6 years earlier. The one they'd built slowly. The one that was supposed to become a down payment on a lake property someday. $86,500, Eleanor said. Moved out in 2 installments. The first on March the 11th. The second on March the 25th. Both authorized under the power of attorney you signed for her 3 years ago, back when her mother was sick and you wanted her able to act fast if something happened to you on the road. Daniel reached for his coffee, more to have something to do with his hands than because he wanted it. "Which account did it land in?" he asked. "A new one," Eleanor said. "Opened the same week as the second transfer. Joint title. The other name on it is David Larkin." "Larkin," Daniel repeated. Quietly, he'd seen that name before. On the acquisition file, listed as Sterling Freight Solutions Vice President of Regional Operations, the executive his own due diligence team had flagged as most likely to push back against new ownership. "That's exactly what we're going to confirm," Eleanor said, when he didn't say anything else. She set down a third document, a lease agreement for a 2-bedroom condominium in Cincinnati, signed in both their names, dated 4 months before the wound that hadn't even happened yet. The deposit had come from the same account. The lease term began the same month Sterling's board had quietly started fielding acquisition offers. The same month Larkin had told 2 colleagues, according to an internal email Eleanor had also somehow obtained, that he expected to be running the Western Division by spring. This hadn't been decided on a Tuesday night. It had been under construction for the better part of a year. Daniel stood up and walked to the window, looking at all 3 documents the way he'd look at a set of plans spread across a table. Not at any single sheet first, but at the whole layout at once. He could see how each piece connected to the next. The hotel charges, the transfer, the lease. The timing of Larkin's expectations set directly against the timing of an acquisition Larkin had no idea was already someone else's. He could see the entire structure, every line, every place one decision had fed straight into the next. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said. "Don't be," Daniel said. "You did exactly what I needed." He didn't act immediately. Raymond Boyce, the attorney who'd handled the Sterling acquisition from the start, had already been pulling personal records before Daniel even called him. Eleanor had reached out 3 days earlier, trusting him enough not to wait for permission. Within 9 days, Raymond had identified the unauthorized power of attorney transfers, cross-referenced the lease, and flagged the gap between Larkin's promotion expectations and the acquisition's actual closing date. He called Daniel at 6:10 in the morning, the hour he did most of his real work, because the work didn't keep daylight hours. A forensic accountant named Patricia Nguyen came in the following week. She spent 4 days inside the joint account's full transaction history, the lease paperwork, and Sterling's internal personnel files, which Daniel, as the company's new majority shareholder, now had every legal right to access. What she found was worse, in scope, than Daniel had expected. A third transfer, smaller, $11,000, routed through a personal line of credit Vanessa had opened in his name without his signature, 6 weeks before the wound scene. Vanessa called twice that first week. Daniel let both calls go to voicemail. Her first message sounded like the version of herself she'd rehearsed in the kitchen, composed, slightly clinical, asking him to be reasonable about how they handled things going forward. Her second message, recorded the next afternoon, had a different register entirely. The composure had thinned at the edges. She mentioned people putting ideas in your head. She mentioned her attorney, twice, as though saying it made it true. Daniel listened to both messages once each. He noted the shift the same way he'd note a stress crack appearing, where a load-bearing point had been rated for less than it was carrying. He didn't call back yet. He didn't move fast. That was the part Vanessa had never found a way to account for. She had spent the better part of a year deciding what kind of man she was dealing with, and she had gotten the central thing wrong. She'd read his patience as the limit of what he was capable of. It wasn't. Patience was the one skill Daniel had spent his entire career building, sequence by sequence, job by job. She had simply never had a reason to watch him use it on something that mattered to him personally. 3 weeks after the wound scene, Daniel called her himself. His voice was level, cooperative even. He told her he wanted to resolve the financial questions without dragging either of them through a courtroom, and that he'd arrange a meeting where both attorneys and a few relevant people from her workplace could sit down and settle the matter cleanly. "That sounds reasonable," Vanessa said, too quickly. He could hear the relief she was trying to keep out of her voice, the relief of someone who believed the worst part was already behind her. "Tuesday works," Daniel said. 10 o'clock. "At the lawyer's office?" "No," he said. "Sterling's headquarters. 4th floor." She didn't ask why. He didn't tell her. He ended the call. Raymond was sitting across the table from him, watching. "She thinks this is already resolved," Daniel said. Raymond said nothing. He refilled Daniel's coffee. Daniel reached the 4th floor conference room 22 minutes before anyone was expected. He preferred it that way. The room was the kind of space companies build to look neutral and never quite manage it. A long walnut table, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the rail yard 3 blocks east. The particular stillness of a place where people come to be told things they didn't choose to hear. Daniel had been in that exact room 11 days earlier, the day Sterling's board formally ratified the transfer of controlling interest. Nobody outside the boardroom had been told yet. That was about to change. Raymond arrived at 9:48, with Patricia Noyan behind him, a single folder under his arm. Nothing about either of them suggested urgency. The folder had taken months to build. It didn't need to look heavy to be heavy. Vanessa and David Larkin walked in together at 10:01, 4 minutes after the meeting invite had told them to expect a leadership transition briefing. Attendance required. Larkin had clearly come straight from another meeting, jacket still buttoned, a tablet under his arm, the posture of a man expecting good news about his own future. Vanessa glanced at Daniel once, a quick professional nod, the kind she might give a vendor. Then she turned her attention to Raymond, as though Daniel were simply another item on an agenda someone else was running. Raymond opened the meeting himself. "Before we move to the broader announcement," he said, "there are several matters that require acknowledgement from everyone present." He set the first document on the table, unhurried. On March the 11th and March the 25th, $86,500 was transferred out of a jointly held account under an authorization that had not been granted for this purpose. A civil claim has already been filed. Vanessa's expression didn't move. The effort it took to keep it that way was visible to anyone watching closely. Daniel was watching closely. Patricia placed the second document beside the first, the transfer trace, the receiving account, the lease that had drawn from it. The receiving account is jointly held by Vanessa Cross and David Larkin, she said, without inflection. The deposit on a Cincinnati property followed 11 days later. Larkin's tablet stayed exactly where it was on the table. He didn't reach for it. We're not making any criminal representations today, Raymond continued. What we're confirming is that this documentation exists, that it's preserved, and that it will form part of the record going forward. Vanessa's attorney, Daniel, hadn't even noticed him come in, looked up from the page for the first time since the meeting started. Whatever ease he'd arrived with had left his face. Raymond set down the third document, the one Daniel had been waiting for. This last part concerns everyone in this room, he said. As of 11 days ago, controlling interest in Sterling Freight Solutions transferred to Crossline Holdings. Mr. Cross is the company's majority shareholder. The room went quiet for what felt like a long time. Daniel counted it. 9 seconds. Larkin spoke first. Mr. Cross, he said, and stopped, the title sitting strangely in his mouth. Vanessa didn't say anything at all. Daniel watched something behind her eyes recalculate the entire shape of the last 8 months in real time. We'll allow time for review, Raymond said. Daniel stood. He hadn't brought anything to the table beyond the one folder, and it had already done what it came to do. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Raymond's hand, then Patricia's. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned. He spoke to Vanessa directly, not loudly, not for the room. For her. You called me worthless the night I signed the papers that made this company mine, he said. I didn't need you to know that yet. I just needed it to already be true. He walked out. He didn't look back. It didn't unravel all at once. Larkin resigned from Sterling 14 days later, before anyone above him had to decide what to do about it. Whatever future he and Vanessa had been building toward, it hadn't accounted for the man funding it being the man who now signed his severance. He stopped returning her calls within the month, according to people who still talked to Daniel about things they probably shouldn't have. Vanessa's situation compressed the way a structure does when a load-bearing point gives out. Not dramatically, just steadily, one section settling onto the next. The civil judgment required full repayment of the misappropriated funds, with interest. Her position at Sterling became untenable within weeks, staying on as an account manager at a company her husband now owned. After what the fourth-floor meeting had made part of the company's record, wasn't a conversation anyone needed to have out loud. She resigned in October and spent 6 months finding comparable work elsewhere, in a different industry, at a table where nobody already knew her name. Daniel kept building. Crossline Holdings grew past Sterling within 2 years into a logistics group operating across 4 states. His name went on permits, leases, and contracts with companies that had never heard of him 18 months earlier. He hired 11 people the first year, with a 12th starting the following spring. He returned every message the same day he received it. He gave timelines and met every one of them, the way he always had. 14 months after the conference room, Crossline's offices occupied the top floor of the same building where the leadership briefing had happened. Daniel's office looked out over the same rail yard. On his desk sat a small digital timer, the kind site crews use to track concrete pours. Eleanor had given it to him the week the civil judgment was finalized, with 2 words engraved on the back: sequence matters. He kept it beside his coffee mug and checked it most mornings out of habit, though there was nothing left on it worth timing. On a clear morning in early April, Daniel stood on the catwalk above Sterling's dispatch floor, coffee in one hand, watching the day's first trucks pull out on schedule. Below him, the warehouse moved the way it was supposed to. Dispatchers calling routes into handheld radios, a forklift backing up with its alarm sounding, someone laughing near the loading dock about something he couldn't hear from up here. He checked the dispatch board. Every route on time, the way it had been for 11 straight weeks. A dispatcher's voice came up clear over the radio static, calling out a route number, calling out a load time. Daniel listened to it land exactly where it was supposed to. It was still mostly about routes and load times, in the end. He just never agreed that made it a small thing to be good at. He finished his coffee, picked the timer up off the railing, and went down the stairs into the warehouse, the way he did every morning now. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've got 2 more picked out that I think you'll really enjoy.